White fragility. It is a thing, and it is absolutely a thing in the flow arts. As it turns out, waving props around did not make us immune. Today, I want to talk a little bit, especially to my fellow flow artists who are either white or white presenting, about the things we really don't seem to want to talk about, and why we still have to. And yes, this video comes with a content warning. If you're already spent talking about race with your white friends, feel free to skip this one and come back if and when you have the spoons. Drex here from Drex Factor Poi, bringing you the love of poi spinning and flow arts to benefit your body and brain. And today, hopefully we're going to benefit some of your friends that you might not even realize you've hurt. Before we dive in, I just want to give a quick shout out to the friends of the channel. Big thanks to Dark Monk, Flow DNA, Flow Fests, Flow Toys, Juggling Calling, Pyroterra Light Toys, Spinballs, and Ultra Poi for helping to make the videos on this channel possible. You can learn more about all these amazing companies and the work that they're doing to support flow artists like yourself by checking out the links that I've got down in the description of this video. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty challenging topic to dive into, not only because it's one that in many respects I kind of feel a little out of my depth on, but also because by its very nature this is a topic that tends to result in some pretty intense negative reactions from the people that it's most intended to help. Oh, I cannot wait for the comment section on this one. So let's start off by defining the term that I'm using here. If you're unfamiliar with it, white fragility or white defensiveness refers to a set of defensive reactions that white people engage in when confronted with conversations on privilege, structural racism, or discrimination. More specifically, author and academic Robin DiAngelo frames white fragility as when white people react to racial stress with an outward display of emotions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and leaving the stress-inducing situation. She believes these reactions serve to reinstate a white racial equilibrium. And yes, I know that her book comes with some asterisks. We're going to come back to that. So what does this look like, especially in the flow arts? Well, have you ever denied that you have privilege? That is, that your life has been difficult despite being white or white presenting? Have you responded to topics around race in the flow arts by saying you don't want to talk about politics? Have you ever said, I don't see color, or we're all just artists? Are you afraid of getting canceled if you say anything at all? Have you ever cried when somebody has pointed out a microaggression to you? Has your response to having a microaggression pointed out ever been to wonder why this person is shaming you and or why they suddenly think that you're a bad person? If you answered yes to one or more of the above, it is highly likely that you have felt or engaged in white fragility. Yes, dear friends, this is a thing. Okay, so why exactly is this harmful? Well, let's walk through one example that I've seen play out several times online. When it's pointed out that there are fewer artists of color sponsored by major prop makers, it's not uncommon for white or white-presenting flow artists to say that the numbers are in line with the proportion of artists of color within the flow arts, or to insist that they don't see color. Both of these responses kind of miss the forest for the trees. What's being pointed out here is that flow artists of color aren't being represented adequately in our subculture, and artists who identify as such either feel uncomfortable or excluded as a result. So when one or more flow artists of color talk about harms that they have experienced in our community, the response is to deny the problem exists, deny its impact on the people coming forward, or to insist that we're actually one of the good white people and not complicit in the problem. And you notice how each and every one of those responses kind of ignores the original problem? This has come up again and again in multiple Facebook groups in the past few months. There have been many posts calling out issues related to racism and discrimination within the flow arts that are met with, let's just call it some resistance. The ways in which this manifests can be as simple as people denying the problem, all the way up to people saying that even talking about racism in the community is toxic and leaving the groups as a result. I don't think it's toxic. I think that it's necessary. And I think it says a lot about us and our perception of ourselves that such a thing even comes up in conversations. But wait, hold up. We're flow artists. We eat organic, we voted for Bernie, we have plenty of black friends. We did all the things right. How can we possibly be doing the same thing that all of those racists out there in the mainstream culture are doing? Now, I think the biggest and most important piece of groundwork that we need to lay down here is to assert something that a lot of people are going to find pretty troubling. Being part of a subculture or counterculture movement doesn't mean that we're inherently not engaged in racist behavior or have racist attitudes. Our culture has been built around keeping us as white people comfortable, insulating us from conversations in which we have to examine our privilege or behavior is part of how we get programmed from a very early age. And unfortunately, there's nothing that does that work of examining your privilege aside from Well, examining your privilege. Picking up a prop, learning yoga, or studying non-Western spiritual traditions don't work as an approximation for having done that work. It has to be engaged with directly, regardless of how uncomfortable that may be. It also has to be said that in a lot of cases, when we enter these spaces that we believe excuse us from checking our privilege, it's frequently because we're in the process of leveraging it. We can easily pick and choose elements of other cultures to appropriate, either to signal our counterculture bona fides or as a way to make ourselves feel unique and special. But how often do we actually stop and ask the cultures that we draw from what they consider respectful? If the mere idea of that is creating some resistance within you, then yeah, fragility at work again. Giving away that degree of control is a threat to our cultural expectations. If these conversations do make you uncomfortable, then as awful as this is to say, my response is good. Deprogramming ourselves frequently is a really uncomfortable process, but that doesn't mean that it isn't either necessary or helpful. If you're more worried about dividing people than you are about acknowledging that divisions already exist, then it should probably tell you something about who you've included in your undivided worldview and who you haven't. It's up to us to do the work rather than expecting our friends of color to make space for us on top of the trauma that they're already dealing with on a daily basis. And I know a lot of this also comes out of conflict aversion. Many of us who come into the flow arts are seeking an environment that is free of conflict, and anything that rocks that boat is not only deeply uncomfortable, but tends to be seen as having a corrosive effect as well. But here's the problem. If we don't talk about the ways in which people are marginalized in our culture, then we also don't get to solutions to that problem. And let's also be real here. Much of the conflict around racism in the flow arts is coming from people who are resistant to acknowledging it. Blaming the people bringing it up is just another way we marginalize them by framing them as the problem and not the problems that they're shedding light on. As a wise person once said, peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the ability to deal with conflict in a peaceful fashion. Do your shadow work here. Process your feelings around conflict rather than expecting others to avoid it in order to make you feel more comfortable. We also have to talk about impact versus intent when it comes to this stuff too. When you accidentally step on someone's toe, you don't normally get angry with them for pointing it out. You apologize for having done it, whether you meant to or not. And this works the same way. Whether you meant to hurt someone else isn't nearly as important as whether you did hurt them. And part of what makes that internalized racism so pernicious is that when I talk about it as stepping on someone's toe, it's clear as day what the right thing to do is. But when the harm you've caused is racially based, it becomes a different story entirely. Above all else, when we get called out for our behavior, this type of fragility is harmful because it recenters us as white people in the conversation and makes our feelings the most important part of it, rather than making space for those who are bringing up these harms. Still wrestling with all of this? Well, here's a few helpful things to keep in mind. Number one, if someone is calling out behavior, it's because they care. Because they care about either the person or the community that this is happening in. If they didn't, they could just as easily ghost. And what they're trying to do is give us a chance to acknowledge and change our behavior. Number two, being called out if you engage in racist behavior isn't the same thing as being labeled a bad person. We all live and grew up in a racist culture, so of course we're going to internalize a lot of those messages. You can't avoid it. Realize that while you didn't get a choice in how you were indoctrinated, you do get a choice in what you do when it's pointed out to you. Number three, progress is not a straight line. You may get called out for something, do some reading and realize your error, and then get called out again later on. Rome wasn't built in a day, and this work is going to be long-term. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. Number four, it's not about you. I know the initial reaction to getting called out because I've been called out before. You feel embarrassed, anxious. You wonder why the person calling you out would make light of what you're doing in this way. All these reactions are understandable, but they also all have something in common. They make you the center of the situation. If your friend is coming forward and talking about something that you did that hurt them, make sure that they're the center of the conversation. That's key to being a good friend and a good ally. Number five, make friends with other white or white-presenting allies. If something comes up and you're having a tough time processing your feelings, don't expect your friends of color to do the heavy lifting for you. Have someone else that's in the same sphere that you can go to. Because your feelings are real, but that doesn't mean that they belong in the broader conversation. And finally, because this is almost certain to come up in the comments, confronting white fragility and the privilege associated with it is not the same thing as saying that your life hasn't been hard. Maybe you're the child of an immigrant family. Maybe you grew up in an abusive household, have battled substance abuse or a mental health disorder. All of that is real, and all of that can result in real struggles. But also think for a second, what if you had that in your background and you were a person of color? Would you have had access to the same resources? Would you have been seen as someone struggling or someone dangerous? Those struggles should be a path to empathy, not a way of closing yourself off from other people's experiences. So, how can you go about confronting and working through your white fragility? Well, here are some recommendations. First up, educate yourself and specifically engage in media or spaces that haven't been created with you in mind. When They See Us, 13th, and I Am Not Your Negro are all on Netflix right now. Give any one of them a watch and see if you can listen before you look for your chance to speak. Read White Fragility, but use it as a starting point rather than an ending point, because it's also written from a white perspective. There's a danger there of keeping ourselves centered in the experience of white fragility itself. Check out How to Be an Anti-Racist or So You Want to Talk About Race, and then keep looking for new things to read, to keep growing and keep learning new things. Talk to people. Put together affinity groups to talk about different people's experiences to work through struggles collectively. Watch those discussions online and absorb the experiences that people are kind enough to share. It's usually pretty hard to do so, so be respectful of that. Even if you've encountered other people of color in your day who've had different opinions or experiences, realize that they're not a monolith and aim to make your behavior comfortable to as broad a swath of people as possible. The challenge here more than anything else is for us to remove ourselves from the center of the conversation. Make it about someone else's feelings for a change. If you got anything out of this video, please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to help other people find this video and help my channel grow. And I also just wanted to put out a huge thank you because this video would not be possible without the kind contributions of these wonderful folks right here. These are my Flow patrons on Patreon, and they, along with the wonderful people listed down in the description, make this video and all the videos on my channel possible. If you'd like to help me out in my mission to bring poi spinning and flow arts to the wider world and help people learn to be creative with their bodies, you can do so by heading over to patreon.com/drexfactorpoi and signing up. You can get early access to all of my content, a say in what topics I tackle in the future, plus some great extras and behind the scenes content too. So go check that out. Please and thank you. And with that, I eagerly await the many calm and considered responses that I'm sure this video will provoke. I realize that a lot of this still centers around the white experience in these discussions, and it was my hope that by covering as many of these bases as possible, I'd throw out something that viewers were more likely to recognize in themselves. Did I miss the mark, and should I have tried to center the voices of people harmed by white fragility more in this video? Let me know down in the comments. Make sure to get out and flow today, and I will see you next time. Peace.